I was living in Abu Dhabi when this happened, and I was 17 years old at that time. I've had a number of experiences from taxi drivers out there who could fit in a horror story, but this one was by far the worst and creepiest, and I'd like to share it if I can. It was Boxing Day 2012, and I was going to my friend's house for his Boxing Day party. He lived in a compound that was a bit of a drive off the island itself, and although not rural suburbs by most standards, this area could be classed as such. These residential suburbs were still mostly in development. Every block had a brand new building site, plenty of empty shells of houses lying around, and there were no security cameras at the time. There wasn't even a pavement either, just big rubble and sand patches split by tarmac roads. Now, taxis in the United Arab Emirates are crazy common. You just put your hand out and one pretty much pulls up right away. Back then, there was a lot less security. There were no cameras or mics in the car, just the meter really. I hailed a cab and sat in front, as a result of a past experience I'd had. We set out on our way. Things started out fairly normally. We talked small talk as I normally would getting into a cab. "Hey, how long have you lived here? Do you enjoy the place?" Eventually, we're on the highway. After we cross the water to the mainland, he pulls over on the hard shoulder and without saying a word to me, pulls out his phone to call someone. He's speaking in his native tongue, and he's of South Asian descent, so I really had no clue what he could be saying. I politely asked him to continue driving as the meter was still going. He nodded, hung up, and got going again. This happened a second time though, again without a single word or warning, and now I was pretty suspicious. This time again I asked him to keep going, but instead he ignored me and kept speaking with this other person on the phone. We were on the highway, so I couldn't exactly get out for fear of going splat on the road. I also probably wouldn't even be able to hail a cab there or might even be jacked for jaywalking. After a few minutes he gets going again though. We pull off the highway, still heading in the general direction I needed to be. That is, until we reached the first roundabout, where we needed to make a right turn. Instead, he went straight over. Everyone knows where this compound is. It's the biggest one in the whole city. As a cab driver, there's no chance he didn't know how to get there. Now I was even more suspicious, and I started to have a big feeling of trepidation. I knew this vibe, and what might be happening. I asked him to turn around at the next roundabout, but he continued to ignore me. Now I was getting very agitated and angry. I asked him to just stop the car and I'd get out and walk myself. But no, he literally just kept ignoring me and kept focusing on the road ahead. At this point, I started shouting at him, spewing out numerous expletives and saying it was very clear he had something else planned. Eventually, he pulled off the main road onto a dirt track that led a couple hundred yards into a massive building site. He kept driving around it. Then he turned and told me to get into the back seat. This repeated in an increasingly forceful manner, to the point where we were now full-on shouting at each other. At the end of the dirt track was this old little minibus with 5 men stood next to it. I didn't notice this immediately. All I'd cared about was that the car had now stopped in the middle of nowhere. I was in the front so I could still get out, not locked in the back. I inexplicably threw some money at him and jumped out of the car with my bag. I started walking swiftly away and began jogging back down the track. I can only imagine that the earlier phone calls he made were to these minibus men, as when I started getting away, they jumped into the minibus and started driving down to catch me, as the taxi turned around and began to do the same. They all pulled up in front of me, like the police do in the movies when they stop a bank robber and jump out. The taxi driver ran right up to me, grabbed me, and screamed point blank at my face to get in the bus. I can still smell and feel the damp heat from his breath as it touched my face, and the little bits of his spit hitting my cheeks. This honestly enraged me so much that I just sorta gripped him by the throat and slammed him against his car. I screamed something back at him, I can't remember what, and let go. They all got their phones out and started calling and messaging and moving toward me, so I got out of there as fast as I could. I ran all the way down and back onto the main road and went to my mate's house by foot. I know I should have taken the number plate, ID number, anything and called the police when I was in the cab, let alone after it happened. However, I was a 17-year-old with a bottle of Jack Daniels in my bag, on the way to a party with all my underage mates drinking, in a Muslim country with a drinking age of 21. The paranoia of the trouble was enough to keep it quiet from the authorities, although I did tell every single family member and friend. I'd like to start this out by saying I've always been into true crime. At the time this happened, I was in the best, strongest shape of my life. Still, I looked pretty lean, so I'm sure that wasn't what this person was thinking. I had just turned 20 years old that weekend and was studying abroad in a tiny town of 300 people in the Netherlands, right on the border of Germany. I had spent the weekend visiting my mom in London, and getting back to said tiny town would be an absolute nightmare, but I didn't know just how much of one it would be. How this all worked was, I took a quick plane from the closer airport to get to London, but if I wanted to stay longer, I'd have to fly to an airport about an hour and a half away, take a train to the end of the line, and find a taxi at that small station. All at around 9 or 10 at night. I did this all though and was already on edge. When I got to the station, of course, there were no taxis. It was extremely desolate, save for one single car. I had a suitcase. When they saw me, they turned on the lights. It was an older man, large with white hair. I could see that inside his car he had a taxi screen, so I waved to him. He rolled down the window and confirmed that he was indeed a taxi. I told him the small town I was staying in, and it turned out he knew it. The concierge at the hotel in London had told me this would only be a 20-minute cab ride, so I figured I could hold my ground if anything went down, and got in with the guy. Now, I'm not a very conversational person, but this guy sure was. The second I got in the car, he began driving and started telling me that I looked a lot like his wife. I smiled and told him that was very sweet. He turned to me and looked dead in my eyes. "She's dead," he said, and my blood ran cold. Something y'all should know about me is when I'm with a stranger and I want them to know nothing about me, I put on the persona of an American Southerner who goes to church a lot. Since most people who make me feel uncomfortable have responded positively to that, I tend to roll with it as my go-to. So the second time he told me she was dead, I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm sure she's in heaven." He shook his head. "No, I think she's in hell." Now shit, this is when I start thinking about what I can use as a weapon in this car. Nothing. So I go for the give a bunch of fake details about myself approach. "I'm in ROTC, I said. "Like American military? Love it, I've been training so much." "Are you married?" "No, but my boyfriend is in the military too. I just texted him actually. He knows I'll be back soon." I didn't have a boyfriend, and I didn't serve in the military either, but I had been doing a few military exercises to try and stay in shape because I was obsessed with fitness at the time. On more than one occasion, I'd been asked by Italians if I was in the military. That inspired that part of my cover story, that and wanting to seem hard to kidnap. At this point, the drive had gone on far longer than 20 minutes. We were driving straight out into the woods, on dirt roads with not a single source of lighting. My entire body was beginning to tense up. "Are you married?" he asked again. "I just got back from visiting my mom in London and my dad works for the US government. He's in the CIA. You know, I just want to be just like him one day." I was completely ignoring his questions as the time went on. The man stopped the car in the middle of the woods, staring at me, but I still didn't brake. I simply smiled at him. "Did you need some help with directions or something?" I asked. "You know, I'm pretty good with them. I know this area really well." He made a big sigh and put the car back into drive. We sped up real fast, and in another 10 minutes or so, we made it to my school, where thankfully a group of students were all smoking outside. Thanks," I yelled, handing him the fare that was on the screen. I dragged my bag out of there and stuck to that group of smokers like glue. "Hey," I said to them, still smiling. "You know, that taxi driver was giving me real bad vibes, so can we stay out here together until he leaves?" I didn't want him to know the dorm I lived in, which was right by the entrance. He stayed there for about 20 to 30 minutes, just watching me, before he finally left. Luckily, I'm still alive to this day, and I'm very grateful either that I made myself seem too tough or perhaps too annoying to be a potential victim for him. On October 2016, a longtime family friend began harassing my family. So, I've known this guy since I was around 5 years old. He worked at my dad's friend's car dealership as the person who basically maintenances the exteriors, washes the cars, shines them, etc. My parents became very fond of him because he seemed very sweet, and they felt a lot of pity for him as he had some horrible hygiene habits. They'd often buy him food, gift him clothes, and do other things of that sort. Around 2015, this man got a job right across the street from my mom's. He saw my mom one morning, and they waved to each other like normal. Then, this man started calling my mom very frequently. Now, my mom is extremely nice, perhaps too nice, so instead of just not picking up, she would talk to him quite a bit. At some point though, the guy became completely obsessed with my mom, to the point where she had to tell him to stop contacting her altogether, around May of 2016 I believe. All was well at first, and the guy did stop contacting my mom. Just a few short months later though, he began to watch her religiously. He would park his car in front of my mom's job and just sit there and watch her. She noticed him, but she never saw it as a huge threat, so she never said anything. That's where things started to escalate though. My mom was walking out of work with a coworker one day. Very normal coworker friendship. My mom caught a ride with that coworker to a mandatory work event, so she wouldn't have to drive home too late, as these events tended to end late at night. The whole time though, this guy was watching them walk. He suddenly got in his head that my mom was having an affair with this guy and decided to follow them. They arrived at their destination and my mom stayed in the car, while her coworker quickly went inside to check if it was the right destination. The stalker walked right up to the car, opened the door, slapped my mom in the face, grabbed a knife from his car and slashed the coworker's tires. My mom was in complete shock and immediately called for her coworker to come outside. In the end, the coworker decided not to press any charges against him, even though he easily could as there were cameras outside the location. My mom mentioned none of this to my dad, by the way, because my dad was extremely explosive, to the point where he would guaranteed get in trouble over this guy. Everything is okay for a couple of days, until this guy starts calling my mom non-stop and leaving her threatening voicemails as well. The voicemails would say things along the lines of, "If you don't meet me at this hotel on Wednesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to tell your husband you're cheating on him." This scared my mom a lot, because my dad had a past with domestic violence. She was scared my dad would believe him and start beating her. Wednesday comes along, and when she gets to work, he's outside watching her, just watching her the entire day. At this point, she called my grandparents. My grandpa was ex-military and was not one to fuck around with. They immediately drove over to my mom's job. This guy started harassing my grandparents though, and refused to leave. 1 p.m. comes around and my mom calls the police. The dude booked it across the street and hid, leaving his car abandoned at my mom's job. The police searched for him everywhere, but somehow he was nowhere to be found. The phone calls continued, and things started to escalate. At some point, this man decided to vandalize my mom's car. He threw tar all over it while the car was parked outside my house. The car was completely destroyed, and my parents had to pay a lot of money to be able to fix it. At this point, my dad knew about the whole ordeal, and he was dead set on killing this guy for real. Me and my mom both desperately advised him to calm down, because my mom was planning on getting a restraining order on the guy, and she didn't want my dad to ruin her chances by committing a crime. The man continued calling though, and began to stand outside my mom's job every day for the whole day. The man also started driving past our house every day as well, and began to see me as a target too. He started leaving my mom threatening voicemails saying he was going to do terrible things to me and vandalize my car, so at this point I was even more terrified. At this point in the story, my mom had to call the cops on him several times, but they always said they couldn't do anything, as he had never physically harmed her. My mom decided she was finally going to petition for the restraining order, with the police reports and the voicemails as proof. They set up a court date and gave my mom a temporary restraining order until that date, so approximately 2 weeks. In that time, the guy did not stop calling my mom. My mom called the detective in charge of her case. The guy hadn't even been served with the order yet, a few days before the court date. He was notified with the court date though, so he told my mom he had proof that she won't stop calling him. He started actively targeting the rest of us at this point. I wake up one Saturday morning, only to see my car has been trashed with drawn letters all over the windows and nail polish. Luckily, we were able to scrape it off gently, but by now I was a nervous wreck. I was starting to do badly in my classes and I hadn't been able to sleep for about a month. He began to harass my dad with phone calls and voicemails as well. My dad was a little bit too tough for any of that BS though. Finally, the court date arrived. The man showed up with his stepson, and his stepson started talking shit to my mom. Of course, he only knew this man's side of the story. The judge called them in, did the usual questioning, talked about the police reports, etc. The judge asks him if he has anything to say or show. He tells the judge, "Yes, I have a phone bill that shows she's called me more than 200 times in the past month." The judge looks at him. "Okay, so show me." Guess what? He didn't bring it. There's no such thing. The judge nods her head and says, "Okay, I've reached a verdict." He was found guilty, and my mom was awarded a restraining order for life. After that, we finally had peace in our family again. I just want to tell people who might be in similar situations to please go to the police ASAP. The danger and emotional torture was definitely not worth it. Sometimes they don't go away like we thought this guy would. We took way too long to take action in the end. So here goes my story. I work at a chain grocery store, and I work in a little kiosk fuel center that sells cigarettes, soda, candy, and the like. It's actually pretty much just a little shack, basically. I work there by myself 90% of the time, at least unless we happen to be double covered, which happens very rarely. A week or so ago, a regular comes up to the kiosk. The dude is kind of a douche, but if you get through his request quickly enough, things aren't that terrible. He looks for a minute and asks me for the cigarettes on sale. Most of our cigarettes had a sale going on, so this made my job exponentially harder, considering I had to guess between 30 or 40 different types of packs. It took me 4 or 5 tries to guess which one he wanted. He was cussing and degrading me the entire time, of course. I shrugged it off for now though. I deal with things like that 10 or 15 times a day. The sheer amount he was doing it at though was slightly annoying to me. Then it comes time to pay, and of course the dude is short on money. He tells me, "Alright, I'm a bit short, but I know you have all the money in there, so you can cover the rest of what I owe you." I normally do cover people if they're short, and haven't been acting like a douche, but he straight up told me to cover the remainder. Of course, I told him to fuck off. If he didn't have the money he needed to buy shit, then he shouldn't get them at all. Of course, he got pissed at my response. He had already been bitching at me about the amount of tax that existed on the cigarettes, and accused me of overcharging him because he was black. This just set him off even further. After a while, he started threatening me, and told me he was going to have me fired. I told him I was denying him service at this point, and to get off the lot. I grabbed the phone to call my managers to come out, and get rid of this dude. The whole time this was happening, the customer was screaming bloody murder. He was acting like I just shot his dog right in front of him. That's how much he was screeching. My managers eventually did come out, and they took care of him. They shoved him off that lot. I've dealt with people like him before though, so I didn't really think anything of it. I just tried to finish my shift and go home. After that, I had a few days off. When I come back to work though, 2 of my coworkers tell me that he had come up an hour before my shift with 2 carfuls of people who were asking where I was and when I would clock in next. They asked where I lived too. My coworkers told them they couldn't give that information, and if they had an issue with me, to talk to my managers instead. I started to feel a bit nervous, but I tried to write it off, thinking they'd get bored or just give up since they'd missed me. A couple of days ago, though, I was at work and looked up to see him in his car with a bunch of his friends. They were driving slowly around the kiosk in circles. The dude was straight staring me down the whole time and pointing at me as well. At this point, I'm freaked out, so I called my manager. They have me on security escorts now and told me to take days off to hide away from him. I seriously doubt the dude is going to hunt me down and try and follow me home or something, but I'm still in a state of dread that I'm going to run into him when I go grab groceries or meet one of my buddies out for a drink. I have gone to the police and they're talking with my managers to try and get a name or a license plate from them to track this dude down and tell him to knock it off. The police have told me to be smart and keep my head down for a while. They're also going to patrol the area more often and see if they can't catch the dude in the middle of doing something stupid. It seems though, for the moment, they just can't do much since they have very little to go on for the time being. I'm more freaked out though because I don't want to go to work and get my shit kicked in or have this dude follow me home. This isn't my story, but is instead my dad's. Around 40 years ago, when my dad was in college, he moved quite a ways away from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam to New Haven, Connecticut for college. He wanted to be near as possible to his college, but he also wanted to overlook the city skyline as well. He had already received the Form I-20 and went to the consular at the US Embassy to try and get an M student visa. He was a first-generation immigrant, and though he had taken a fair amount of English classes in Vietnam, he was not fluent and knew nothing about the housing process in America. This is why he decided to go the cheap route and rented out a podunk apartment somewhere near Pine Tree Drive in West Haven. I don't know if podunk is how it's said or whatever, but what I mean is that it was really shady looking. His landlord, as he told me later, gave off some serious red flags from the start. He sorta brushed them off though, because the apartment was only $250 a month. Firstly, the landlord's abode was directly next door to that of my dad's, and during his first night there while he was getting unpacked, he could hear high-pitched screeching and weird opera music. Again, he brushed it off for the same reasons listed above, and also because he was extremely tired. The next morning when he awoke though, he noticed a chair beside his bed that hadn't been there before. When he went to the bathroom, he noted his toilet seat was up as well, though he recalled putting it down that night. Not only that, but his front door was unlocked as well. He tried his best to ignore it. He didn't want to stir up anything with his landlord by accusing him of coming into his room or asking if it had been broken into, therein inferring that the apartment was insecure and the landlord wasn't doing his job. He also wanted to explore West Haven, as his college year didn't start until late August. He had come 3 weeks early to prepare. As he left, he specifically remembered locking his door behind him, but when he returned after a few hours out, he noticed that not only was the door now unlocked, it was slightly ajar as well. This went on for weeks until his college year finally began. Things slightly moved from where he had left them. Articles of food would be missing from his fridge, and other weird happenings started around the apartment. Finally, after a while, my dad had had enough. One night, he decided to stay awake until very late and catch whoever the hell was doing this red-handed. That night, he finished up his homework and climbed into bed, but this time he remained awake. Sure enough, at 2 a.m, he began to see his door handle turning and a hand sliding through the gap. My dad froze. His blood ran cold. He saw the landlord creep in and steal eggs from the fridge. Not only that, but the landlord then went to the bathroom, coming out a couple of minutes afterward. He then slipped out silently once again, leaving the door completely unlocked. This creeped my dad out like hell, of course, which is understandable. For some stupid reason though, he still decided to stay at the apartment for a few more nights, before he finally mustered the courage to confront that landlord. I guess money and wanting to save it can do some stupid things to the brain. This was before the time of mobile phones, and even decent cameras that didn't cost hundreds of dollars. So my dad didn't really have a way to get evidence to show the cops beside the mere accusations of an immigrant. The next night, he once more heard those odd screeching sounds and that weird music coming from his landlord's room. He decided to take matters into his own hands. That weekend, when his landlord went out shopping, he broke into his room, and what he found there was seriously disturbing. First of all, he found some weird sex doll, but when he investigated a bit further, he found this old Kodak camera. Inside of this camera were some extremely low-quality pictures of him in bed sleeping. He noped the fuck out of there, taking the pictures with him, and went directly to the police station. He moved out shortly thereafter. Later, he heard that this same landlord had scared other residents of the apartment off after hearing the odd screeching and opera music, and after seeing all of their things moved around. The building my dad lived in has since been torn down, and my dad decided to just dorm at Sigma Chi. He had first opted to stay away from fraternities because of the heavy partying. We never really knew what happened to that landlord, only that in the end he was facing some serious prison time. I seriously hope after he got out he was never allowed to be a landlord again. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for reaching this far, especially if you made it to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about what I could be doing better, or you have any thoughts about the stories in the video itself or anything like that, please be sure to leave a comment in the comments section below the video. I always enjoy reading all of your guys' comments, even if I can't always respond to them all the time. If you guys would like to have your own story read in a video one day, please be sure to take a look in the description below the video. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I will try to read your story as soon as possible. You can also send it directly to me at my email of bluespookyreadings@gmail.com. If you do decide to send in a story, please make sure to include proper grammar and formatting if you can, as well as including as much detail as you feel comfortable with sharing. This will give your story the most chance of appearing in a future video. Also, please be sure to put in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, the type of story it is if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Overall, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.